They cite the second law of thermodynamics as to why there can't be an atmosphere next to a vacuum.
Somebody sent me a Mr. Cheswick clip of Simandan interviewing a BBC correspondent, presumably of some scientific stature, and he directly put that question to him. I'm paraphrasing Simandan, I do apologise for paraphrasing you, my friend, but words to the effect of, the flat earthers assert that space is debunked by the second law of thermodynamics, what would you say to that? And the guy meandered off into a non-answer for about 3 straight minutes. It was quite amusing. But he didn't get an answer. He didn't get an answer to the question. Got a diversion from the BBC correspondent. But I thought, well, that's very interesting. But now you've brought it up, it's like, well, if it's a non-point, why would Simandan be putting it to a BBC correspondent now? I think it is a point. Because it debunks space, which is a violation of the second law of thermodynamics. There'd be an entropy increase, we'd all be dead. We'd have no gas to breathe because the gas would fill the space. And what do you know? They claim the sky vacuum is called space. A space for gas to fill, in line with natural law, which is violated by space, therefore it's not real.
So the experts spaced out at that moment to that question?
Yeah, he did, literally. He looked in top right-hand corner and accessed his memory of what the second law of thermodynamics was. Whether or not he accessed that information is unclear because he didn't talk about it. He waffled off into the weeds and didn't address it in the slightest. But there we go. He definitely had to think about it.
Why would you have to think about air pressure filling a vacuum if there was no barrier?
He just waffled on about what flat earthers believe and how he admired them for actually looking at science. What went through my mind is this is natural law, not science. You idiot. There we go. You can't expect the BBC correspondent to know the difference between natural law and science now, can you?
Well, my point is, if you didn't phrase the question with flat earther and said, if you had a vial full of gas and another vial that was a vacuum and a valve in between, and you opened the valve with the gas fill the available space, everyone would say yes. But the minute you say flat earther, in that context, they have to weasel out somehow.
Okay.
I think.
So one of their big things is that they cite the second law of thermodynamics as to why there can't be an atmosphere next to a vacuum through entropy.
Okay.
I mean, obviously they don't
because magic pseudo-physics reasons.
Exactly. Yeah, it should be sucked off the planet.
Oh, I see.
So
because gravity doesn't exist either, or something like that. Right. Yeah. Okay, I've got you. Well, first of all, I think your people are interested because I encounter these people mostly because they send me theories of the universe.
Okay.
And I don't have a lot of space doesn't exist. I have a lot of I can explain quantum physics using one handy trick type people.
Yeah.
And a lot of retired engineers who can play with numbers and write 150 pages on how they've explained everything. But your question was how does it make me feel?
They cite the second law of thermodynamics as to why there can't be an atmosphere next to a vacuum.
How does it make me feel? In some way, I don't know if we're going to agree on this. In some ways, I kind of admire it.
Okay.
Right? Because
I'm listening.
I think the worst thing is not to care about science. Right? So the people who upset or who frustrate me are the people who don't even think about the universe. Because I think that I just think it's sad to go about your life. I'm not saying you have to care passionately. I'm not saying you have to understand what an asteroid is, but to not look up at the night sky or not to wonder what that might be is really difficult for me to understand.
Yeah.
So I think at least the average conspiracy theorist, the people who aren't doing politics and causing trouble, at least they're trying to understand the universe. And often they're trying to understand the universe by trying to make observations. Now, or at least, they're using aspects of what they consider common sense, right? And so, but the error they make, of course, is that the universe doesn't care two figs for our notion of common sense, right? And science, the scientific progress, such as it is over the last 400 or 500 years, is continual realization that common sense is wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think the most interesting thing is why they believe so strongly that they should be able to explain the universe.
Yeah.
Because the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, every morning, is the idea that I can spend some of today, I spend a lot of it doing email and paperwork and all the rest of it. I can spend a bit of today trying to work out how the universe works.
Yeah. They cite the second law of thermodynamics as to why there can't be an atmosphere next to a vacuum.
And I think that's great.
Yeah,
and I'm under no illusion it's common sense. So I don't know. Is that too sympathetic? Presumably,
no,
do you just think they're wrong? And
no,
obviously they're wrong.
And in the other, I have a vacuum. And if I open the tap between these two, you will see spontaneously the bromine rush from one to the other. Now that is the simplest change we can have, perhaps, because all that happens is a change in entropy. In this case, the expansion into a vacuum, nothing else is involved. There's no energy change, there's no temperature change, there's no change except entropy.
Do you just think they're wrong? And
no,
obviously they're wrong.
They cite the second law of thermodynamics as to why there can't be an atmosphere next to a vacuum.
That behavior is allowed or condoned or virtue signaled, right? Bad behavior is being promoted worldwide in various different grounds.
Although it's a slightly different spin on what we were talking about earlier with Simon Dan being involved in an interview with a BBC science correspondent, the reaction from the correspondent I actually thought was also noteworthy, regardless of its deviation from the question about the second law of thermodynamics and the sky vacuum. However, he's quick to point out that he was impressed that flat earthers are looking at, quote, science as much as he'd find it wrong when he was asked about natural law. He was essentially trying to illustrate to Simon Dan that maybe these people should be a bit more respected because they're actually looking into the nature of their reality, as opposed to not. I've got more respect for them for looking into it than not, as much as I don't agree with them, was his answer to, how can you have a sky vacuum when it stands in violation of natural law? That was his answer. But you still think, okay, good, that's why you're at the BBC, presumably. He's skilled at diversionary tactics that still make you think about the answer in a way that makes you go, well, he's not ridiculing and vilifying people. In fact, he's commending them for looking into the nature of their reality without answering a second law of thermodynamics violation question.
The more hateful they are towards us.
That could become a problem. I've been thinking about this recently. As much as I say I'm impervious to it, I do notice when the level of disdain, as you put it, increases. And a couple of weeks ago, I juxtaposed the idea of the scientist, in quotes, astrophysicist, that Wakey Wakey interviewed, and her disdain upon realising he was part of a group, or a perceived group from her perspective. Yeah? Well, she didn't suddenly launch into ad hominem attacks and personal attacks or anything of that nature. She just expressed a disapproval that she hadn't been informed that he was a part of a particular group. Now, there are rules surrounding these particular things now, aren't there? And the more overt their disdain becomes, the more that might become a societal problem that needs addressing. So they might inadvertently, the globe as this is, push this subject into a protected arena by their own vicious nature. I mean, in societal terms and legal terms, there are protected groups, including religious subsets, that you can't just go around overtly bashing.
If she'd have turned round and gone, oh, you're non-binary. Oh, I wish they'd told me that before. It wouldn't. Yeah, the response to vilify and attribute negative stuff, and therefore you're not willing to talk to them because you identify as something, wouldn't be tolerated. Yet it still currently is. I think Nathan's making the point that in their vociferousness and the veracity of the attacks on us and the very nature of them, they wouldn't be tolerated against any other identifying group.
Yes, an LGBTQ example is better. Thank you, Adam. Perfect.
It's not perfectly unique, you know.
So let me paraphrase Adam's brilliant example, Arwin. If I was discussing abortion, a controversial hot topic, and you were discussing the subject with me, only to, after a perfectly reasonable discussion and debate about the matter, disclose that you were transgender, and then I turned around and said, well, if I'd have known you were a transgender, I wouldn't have even had the conversation with you. Yeah? That would result in consequences for me. If there is to be perceived a group, a subset of people with a particular belief, if it wants to be labelled that way, I don't, but that's how society would probably label it, then that should potentially be protected. Now, I'm saying that that idea has only been highlighted as a direct result of the increase, vilification of this group called Flat Earth, as much as I hate to say it that way. Well, that's something that may, as a result of their increased vilification of us, get addressed societally.